James Vaughan, congratulations on a deliciously beguiling, bewildering, funny, odd little film. It appears to be a collection of seemingly random vignettes about a nondescript 20-something who doesn't appear to have much going on. That's obviously wrong, isn't it?
Well, it's right and wrong, in that he is a drifting character, and I wanted that to be very much on the surface of the film, for that to be what's happening. But I guess what I was interested in with Ray, the character played by Fergus Wilson so well, was a quality that maybe had some connection to Australian, some element, I suppose, of Australian. Yeah, he is a bit lost. He's a bit disconnected from his past, future. It seems like he's stuck in slow motion or treading water. And I guess I saw some possibility once I started writing the script to connect that to a sense of at least white Australian historical stasis.
Now, James Vaughan, given what you said, you know probably better than me that if you wanted to, you could have shaped a conventional narrative to tell whatever story about this guy that you wanted. Instead, you've gone down the non-conventional route. There's no plot, no character arcs, no third act. Or are there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how you define plot and narrative in these things. I've never been, a confession maybe firstly, I've never been very good at thinking in terms of plot and narrative, and I'm not, it's probably a two-pronged thing. I'm not great at it, but I'm also not that interested in films that do it well, even though I respect it when it is done well. You know, I went and saw The Batman yesterday and enjoyed myself. Although the way the modern blockbusters are going, they also seem to be off on the idea of plot and narrative in those films are starting to become almost experimental in how lengthy and bloated they're becoming. But that aside, I did want it to be a film that it did feel boring, I suppose, and I think you're not wrong to say that there's not much of a character arc and the third act in a traditional sense isn't really there, but I still didn't want it to feel like a film about nothing. I wanted you to have a kind of synthetic suspense in the scenes where you feel like something's about to happen and it is moving, and it's only when you stop thinking about it, it's like, actually nothing's going on here. Where is this going? And I guess that's a form that interests me because I feel like life is actually often like that. You know, we feel very engaged in our day-to-day, we're absorbed in the things we have to do next, and it all feels very important at the time. And then someone says, what did you do last week? And you can't remember any of it, or last month or last year, and it's all just sort of gone because when you look back, maybe there wasn't actually that much that was important about it. It's a film that I wanted to, and I think film in general has this power to capture a sense of the actual living of life, with what we hear, what we see, how we experience life in time. So I did want it to reflect life, maybe more than just be part of a tradition of theatrical or literary structures that often films do lean very heavily on.
You're quite remarkable in the way you use jump cuts. You're watching one of the segments and you're kind of starting to wonder, okay, so what's going on with, whether it's what's going on with the girl, what's going on with the car, what's going on with the job interview, what's going on with the wedding video, what's going on with the ball, which we're going to get to. And then you have these huge jump cuts. And we're often uncertain whether we're going forward or backward in time. Tell me about the principle you apply to your use of jump cuts in this film.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I hadn't even thought of these things as jump cuts that much. I guess often...
in the traditional sense,
a
jump cut is when you cut suddenly to something
Yes.
else
Yes.
that can be related or is vaguely related,
Yes.
but it's a big leap.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm using
Yes.
the term
No,
jump
no,
cuts.
I think I accept it, but in my own head, it was perhaps often thinking about jump cuts as, something to accelerate the pace, and I guess in some ways it is that, but often I suppose the way I'm interested in using them is playing with duration, maybe extending something for longer than it would normally go for, and then by the time the cut eventually comes to something else, it does feel random in a way. So I was interested in cutting as one way of keeping people unsure, exactly like you said, whether you're moving forward or backward, but yeah, spatially, temporally, it's cutting is another way of keeping people on the edge, of their seat, and even if nothing's actually happening, I like the sort of craft elements of editing that allow you to play with a sense of anticipation, even if nothing is actually nothing ends up happening. So yeah.
Well, you certainly do that because you are playing with the audience's expectations constantly, and as you say, each big cut, you're wondering, so what's going on now? What's going on now? Are you taking your cues from any other director that you admire or that you follow? Where did you get this sense of enjoying manipulation of the audience?
It sounds very sinister when you put it like that, and maybe it is. But yeah, I think there are filmmakers whose cutting in particular I really like. Even if perhaps on the surface there's not that much in common with this film and those filmmakers, but someone like Pitchapong Weerasethakul, Thai filmmaker who started in the sort of early 2000s and had Memoria out this year, is someone whose cutting I really have always loved. There's a sense of savouring every moment in time, and the cut always comes at, he'll have these really long takes, and somehow when the cut happens, it's still shocking or impactful in some way. The cut becomes an event in the scene, and I don't think Friends and Strangers achieves that kind of gravity with its cutting. But yeah, that's someone who I really have admired in the way he edits, because he uses the cutting is not just serving the story or the character or keeping a consistent dramatic pace. The cutting is as much, there's a sense of creativity and shaping of the whole film through the cutting, and it's not just the cutting in these films. I think it's like every aspect, and probably Abbas Kiarostami is another one whose films like Through the Olive Trees and Life and Nothing More and The Wind Will Carry Us, those like mid-90s, early 90s close-up, those films that, the cutting, there's just something very textural in the cutting that I've always admired. It's something I enjoy, I guess, as an editor too, and the writing, becomes important as well, because you're writing the film when you're writing the film, but then you're rewriting it again. It's like that Bressonian thing of the film is made 3 times. It's written and then directed and then edited, and each time so trying to keep that sense of both in the writing, the way the scenes are structured, the narratives that snake around a bit, and trying to keep that going through the way it's produced during the production period, and then again with the editing, keep that spirit there through the whole process, so that you're in different ways kind of not sure where things are going. And it is manipulation, but it's also I mean, I think that's a fair way to describe it, but for me I probably don't think about it that way. I just think about what kind of film would I like to see, and I really like films where you feel like the story at any moment could go in any direction, and having that feeling of like freedom at each point. The point about the humour and it being enjoyable in a basic way was important to me. Like I do really like films that don't treat the project of the film, the watching experience, as some kind of academic or formal, exercise. And this is something maybe to speak about another filmmaker, Hong Sang-soo, something I in a contemporary sense, a filmmaker who I love for his ability to combine formal aspects of experimentation with, you know, a lightheartedness and a wryness and comedy, basically. I think coming through film school, there was often the idea that you studied films and had to be, if it was a serious film that was made in a serious way or had serious artistic aspirations, then it also had to be kind of heavy. And it just never felt, you know, totally right to me. I didn't see why you couldn't have comedy and seriousness, that actually, you know, those two things can complement each other and they can kind of bounce off each other. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So, I did want the film to be funny, and it won't be to everyone's taste because it's there aren't jokes per se, you know.
Let me just quickly ask you a couple of what the hell is this about questions.
Yeah, sure.
Just firstly, the wedding video, which is probably the longest segment in the film, where he goes to the house and he's late and there's mystery about what's going on next door and so on. Are you able to articulate what that segment is meant to be about?
Yeah. I mean, without trying to really narrow it too much, because it's sort of an attempt to be raising questions more than answering anything all the time. But I guess it's fair to say that the wedding video itself is not that important, you know. And I think in a different film, that interview scene would be in the first third of the film, and then you would see the wedding, you know, and you'd see him maybe stuff that up or meet someone at the wedding and there'd be some love story element. But the fact that the scene ends with just a pitch for something that you never see, I guess, is an indication that it's not the thing in itself that's so important. So it's more like a confrontation, I guess, between younger and older, and a confrontation really between two aspects of Australian society, I guess, which is the people who are sort of drifting as the main character kind of is, and the people who are also drifting but are in a more assertive or powerful position and not afraid of, you know, presenting that. So the bullying kind of element that goes on in that scene between the older character and the younger one, I guess for me it was just a way to reflect on different elements of privileged white culture, where you've got the ones that are more actively involved in reproducing systems of power in white culture, and the ones who are passively just hoping to catch some of the crumbs that come off, you know, the side, and maybe in their heads think, I'm not associated with this, or I'm not allied to this, but I'm still very much part of it. And that's sort of how I feel, having come through a white, private school education system in Sydney. And the film in many ways is about the Colonial project, even as abstract as that is, and that's sort of why it's bookended with these colonial kind of references that start and end. And so, for me, that house was just a kind of pressure cooker way of indirectly exploring some of those questions about where we've come from and where we're heading and what we value.
So it's not a matter of trying to read too much into this film to say that it actually does even obliquely address the issue of colonial overlay of an indigenous culture. That seems to be one of the subtextual things in the film. I thought, Ginny, you're overdoing it. You know, step back, ease up. But from what you're saying, that's intentional.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. I mean, but again, the film wasn't intended to be answering any questions about this. It was more an attempt to present the way that we look away from or deflect away from thinking about these things. So the space, you know, the mental space that the main character Ray is in for a lot of the film is one of just letting things kind of wash past. And I feel like we're at a point historically and culturally where we do have a lot of massive structural problems with cultural questions about how we relate to our past and genocide and dispossession and these things, which we're not really getting any closer to addressing or confronting. So it's not so much about those things, it's more about the avoidance of those things, which is why the presence of Indigenous people in the film is like an absence, more than that there are, it's a keenly felt, I hope, absence rather than something that we're constantly, again, like thinking about another kind of film way to approach it would be to tell a more direct story about that kind of thing.
Now, you deliberately set up a mystery about at least two things in that sequence. One is the picture of the Queen, what's going on with that, and what the hell is going on next door with Miles, which you build up this tension and then you deliberately refuse to resolve it. Why?
I mean, there's two kinds of mysteries, I guess, and there's two sort of mystery films. One's the maybe more genre tradition is where you keenly, you sort of intricately, design a kind of puzzle that eventually is unraveled and solved. And then there's the other tradition, which is probably not even, hardly a tradition at all, but a certain slice of maybe art house kind of cinema where it's more of an interest in the idea of mystery itself, and probably someone like Jacques Rivette, the French New Wave filmmaker, whose films are always about a mystery that's never solved, and just a sense of the mystery of existence itself. A lot of my favourite filmmakers seem to have mystery at the core of whatever they're doing, and things are left unresolved. And I feel like not just film but art in general, I'm interested in the posing of questions about things more than like the solving of an answer, because we rarely in real life, again coming back to real life and cinema's relationship with real life, we rarely in real life actually solve any of these puzzles of existence. They're ongoing every generation, every millennium. It's the philosophers all asking the same questions. No one's ever getting any closer to answering them. So it's more an interest in the act of asking questions and the act of being puzzled, more than finding answers to these things. Yeah.
Are you a fan of Mulholland Drive with David Lynch?
Of course, yeah.
What's the deal, James Vaughan, with the ball? The ball sequence. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
And I thought, again, there's obviously something going on here, and the best I could do, apologies in advance, was that the ball was his life. And he was just letting the ball drop and drift away. Yeah. That's pretty low rent interpretation.
Well,
it's the best I could do. What was going on with the ball sequence? And just to explain, the car's broken down and they're about to drive off in the other car, but he goes back to the car and it's in a back lane, and then there's another lane perpendicular to it, and then he sees a bag and there's a ball in the bag, and this is completely out of shot of the other characters, and he just picks up the ball and he bounces it, I think, and then just lets it drop down the street. I love it. What does it mean?
I wouldn't say there's one sort of literal meaning with it, but that was something that it was just an idea on the day, to be honest. Originally, the scene was meant to end as with a close-up on the note he was writing, and I don't know where the idea came from, but it was just there's something about like a sense of futility about everything that was around him, and it seemed to express that in some way. There's also a scene in I think it's Close-Up, Kiarostami's Close-Up, which is just one of my all-time favorites, where a character's kind of waiting for something and they kind of knock a bottle and it starts rolling down the street. In some ways it was probably a clumsy and silly homage to Kiarostami. Yeah.
One of the delightful things about the film is that you see him intent on igniting conversations between the film and the viewer. That the idea of getting the viewer to ask, well, what is going on? Why is the character doing this? Is it intended as like a conversation starter, both inside an audience member's head and the other members of the audience?
Definitely. Not that I think necessarily it achieves that, and I think for plenty of people that watch it and go, it's a thought-terminating film. It's about nothing. It defeats. It's sort of like it's a silly film, but I just hope that I guess for some people it will yeah, it will provoke questions, not just about Australia and about our culture that we have built here and continue to rebuild, you know, with every generation, passively or actively, or, you know, but also, questions about like film and what a film is as you're watching it too. What matters when you're watching a film? How do we experience a film? What does a film represent? And yeah.
Did you just use the phrase thought-terminating film? You did?
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard that before. And that was in response to me saying, well, it's igniting conversations, and then thought-terminating film.
Well, I think you're always, when you're playing with absurdity, you're always playing with the kind of termination of meaning and sense, you know, and the film is absurd in a lot of ways, but I think the world is too, and sometimes, you know, embracing that and like the theatre of the absurd is something I've always really appreciated and liked, and sometimes by presenting, you know, the fact that so much of what just goes on around us, we've built structures to make them make sense objectively, but then you step back or see things from a different perspective and they don't no longer make sense anymore.
Tell me a bit about your background and how that affected the making of this movie.
My background's not particularly interesting, really. I went to UTS straight out of school, went to University of Technology Sydney, and I took a year off, and as a lot of young people do, just kind of bummed around in Europe and spent a lot of money and came home wondering what I gained. And then went into uni, and I guess like as soon as I was at uni in film school, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I made a short film at the end of that course called "Do You Like It, I Love It," that I guess it was just my uni film, and I didn't know that it would ever reach a bigger audience, but it ended up going to Berlin and a few other festivals. It was at MIF in 2013, and that was, I guess seeing like a positive response to that film did
you mentioned white privilege before, and also you are in this film addressing this general impression of millennials as being kind of, if not totally aimless, but perhaps unmotivated. Is this something that you felt you either saw or felt yourself that you wanted to put in the film?
Definitely. I like, white, growing up on the North Shore in Sydney and going to a private school, extremely white environment, and the school I was at, I don't think that's unusual. A lot of the other schools, same kind of thing. It's a sort of factory for the future business leaders, politicians, and lawyers, doctors, the sort of managerial class, I guess. And it's designed intentionally that way. You know, the idea is that you come out of that school and you get together with someone from the equivalent school, you know, the female sort of equivalent, and you reproduce, and the next generation happens, and it's like, so much of the private school system just seems to me like really just designed exactly for that, to keep wealth and privilege within a small circle. I guess I was a defective product of that factory, that I didn't want to do that, but at the same time, it's because of that privilege that I was able to, I think if you come from a more precarious economic situation, the idea of spending 8 years making a film and not lining up a sort of bankable kind of safe future, economic future for yourself is really hard. It takes more. It's harder to do if you don't come with that safety net that I had. So I was lucky to be able to make the film.
So you describe yourself as a defective cultural product.
Yeah.
Well, here's hoping they don't issue a recall. Just quickly, just in a nutshell, tell us the life the film has had so far. You got reviewed in the New York Times.
Yeah, which was really surprising. The film had its first screening at Rotterdam Film Festival, its premiere, and I think that was really, really important in terms of where the film ended up going after. It also got accepted into another, maybe more A-list kind of festival, but in a lower or less, less important section of that festival, and it was a hard decision at the time to choose. But having Michelle Carey, a programmer now at Rotterdam, who used to be the artistic director at MIF for many years and who did such an amazing job in that role, having her advice at Rotterdam, and obviously she was biased because she was working for Rotterdam, but I really trusted her, and it was her advice to go with Rotterdam just because it would position the film in front and put it before the right people. And I think, the critical response, the New York Times is sort of a culmination of a lot of critics who'd seen it a year earlier and I guess were like positive on the film, and that helped it get into new directors, new films in New York, and John Ju in Korea. Other festivals have had a similar programming approach, I guess, to Rotterdam, and from there a lot of other festivals and Movie, picked up the film and it's streaming on Movie now globally, ever except Australia, because it's going to be streaming somewhere else in Australia. But
What's next for you?
Another feature. Hopefully, it won't take another 7-8 years.
This took 8 years to make.
Yeah. Well, I started writing in 2015.
Yeah.
And it's self-funded, so.
What does that mean? Does that mean you paid for it?
Yeah, it means I paid for it. And that the funding part took like four years, well, actually more like 6 or 7, because it was still being funded, up until this year, because there's always new things that, 2 days ago we printed off a bunch of posters, for the release, and it's just, when you're self-funding, it's just incredible how many it costs.
Are you allowed to say how much it costs?
I prefer not to say exactly how much, but in film terms, it's considered a low budget, micro budget, depending on how you define it.